Beneath the causeway at Saqqara, in a corridor sealed since the Old Kingdom, sit 24 granite boxes. Each one weighs close to 100 tons. Each one is hollowed out to an interior flatness so exact that a modern optical engineer measuring them in the 1990s assumed his instruments were miscalibrated. They were not built to hold a person. The lids alone weigh more than the largest single stones in the Great Pyramid. Nobody living has ever found a body inside one, and nobody has ever fully explained why a box built for something that size was needed at all. That is the anchor. Everything else in this video sits downstream of it. The official account calls these the Serapeum boxes, ceremonial containers for the mummified Apis bulls, sacred animals honored across 2,000 years of Egyptian religious practice. It is a tidy explanation, and for most of the 24 boxes, it may even be correct. But 3 of the boxes, the oldest 3, carved in a style that predates every dated Apis burial by centuries, show interior wear patterns inconsistent with holding an animal at all. Egyptologist Auguste Mariette, who first tunneled into the Serapeum in 1850, recorded in his own field notes that these 3 boxes were empty when found, their lids already shifted, and that the surrounding chamber walls carried a cluster of hieroglyphic panels unrelated to any bull cult he could identify. Mariette catalogued the panels. He did not translate them in full. They sat in the Cairo storerooms for over a century before anyone returned to them. If you're enjoying this story so far, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe. Drop a comment telling me where in the world you're watching from. I love hearing from you. Those panels are where this gets strange. The glyphs Mariette cataloged use a term that has come up on this channel before, Netjeru Aa, the Great Ones of Measure, the same designation carved at the Osireion in Abydos and cross-referenced in Salim Hassan's 1938 survey notes. In those earlier sources, the Netjeru Aa are described in physical, not divine terms, builders of unusual height who worked the oldest structures on the Giza Plateau before the pyramids as we know them existed. The panels beside the 3 empty boxes at Saqqara add something the Abydos and Giza sources never mention. They name what was placed inside these particular containers, and it was not an animal, and it was not empty by accident. The glyphs use a determinative combining the marker for a body at rest with the marker for something too large to measure by the standard cubit rod. Egyptian scribes had a precise system for recording length. A grain silo, a boat hull, a monument base, all of it measured in cubits, palms, and fingers. Numbers a builder could check against a physical rod. When the scribe reached the contents of these 3 boxes, the numeral column is left blank. Not damaged, not eroded. Blank, with a small glyph beside the gap that appears nowhere else in the Egyptian corpus. A single vertical stroke followed by a wave. Translators who have looked at it read it 2 different ways. One reading is administrative shorthand for exceeds the rod. The other is a phonetic spelling that has never been matched to any known word. Both readings agree on one thing. The scribe was recording a length he did not have the tools to state as a number. The boxes themselves support the reading. The interior cavity of each of the 3 older Serapeum containers measures just over 4 meters from end to end. That is not a resting place for a bull. It is not a resting place for any animal native to the Nile Valley, or for a human body of ordinary proportion. The dimensions match nothing in the standard funerary catalog. What they do match, almost exactly, is the 7-cubit plus 2-span measurement recorded for the Netjeru Aa at Abydos, the same figure this channel covered when we opened the Osireion doorways. 4 meters, roughly 13.5 feet. A box built to hold something that size, sealed, and then deliberately left unlabeled in the one place where Egyptian record-keeping was normally most exact. Here is the orthodox wall, stated plainly, because it deserves to be. Mainstream Egyptology holds that all 24 Serapeum boxes serve the Apis cult, that any apparent size discrepancy reflects damage, later reuse, or simple construction variants across centuries of continuous use, and that the blank numeral is a scribal shorthand with a mundane administrative meaning we simply haven't matched yet. That is a fair position. Blank cells exist elsewhere in Egyptian record-keeping, and not every gap hides something extraordinary. The wall is not weak. It is just incomplete, because it does not explain why 3 specific boxes, older than the others, carved with a different tool signature, sit beside a set of panels that reuse a designation this channel has already traced to two other major sites, and it does not explain the oversized cavity itself. The crack widens when you look at where these three boxes sit inside the corridor. They are not placed with the others in the main gallery. They occupy a side chamber, cut later into the bedrock, sealed behind a wall of masonry that French engineer Georges Daressy noted in 1901 was structurally distinct from the surrounding corridor, built from a different quarry source entirely. Daressy flagged the anomaly in his field report and moved on to cataloging the rest of the site, which was, at the time, his actual assignment. The side chamber has never been fully excavated below floor level. Ground-penetrating radar work conducted at Saqqara in the early 2020s, aimed primarily at unrelated Old Kingdom shaft tombs nearby, picked up a return consistent with a void beneath that chamber floor, roughly 2 meters down. The survey team's public report notes the anomaly in a single line and recommends further investigation. No further investigation has been published since. So we have a real box, built to a scale the standard account cannot comfortably fit inside a bull's resting place. We have a blank numeral where every other entry in the corridor carries an exact figure. We have a side chamber cut separately, sealed separately, sitting on top of an undated void nobody has opened. And we have a name, Netjeru Aa, that keeps surfacing at 3 of Egypt's oldest and strangest sites, always attached to a physical description too specific to be pure metaphor, and always followed by an ending nobody wrote down. What was buried with them is the harder question, and it is the one the panels seem most reluctant to answer directly. Beside the blank numeral, in a second column, the scribe carved a short list using the same administrative register applied elsewhere to grave goods and temple inventories, the format Egyptian record keepers used for objects placed with the dead. Most of the list is unremarkable: vessels, cloth, the standard provisioning language. But 2 entries break the pattern. One glyph cluster is followed by the determinative for a worked mineral, not a tool, not a vessel, a raw worked substance, paired with a modifier that in every other administrative context on record means does not tarnish. Ancient Egyptian metallurgists knew the difference between gold, which does not tarnish, and copper alloys, which do, and they had specific vocabulary for each. This entry uses neither the standard gold glyph nor the standard copper glyph. It uses a compound that shows up nowhere else in the corpus, built from the sign for stone and the sign for metal fused into a single unit, as if the scribe were describing a material that behaved like both and belonged to neither category cleanly. The second unusual entry is smaller and, if anything, stranger. It is a single glyph, repeated 3 times in sequence, using the determinative for a mechanism, something built to move under its own operation, rather than something inert. The same determinative appears in Egyptian texts describing shadoof water-lifting devices and boat rigging, ordinary machinery the Egyptians understood and built themselves. Here it is attached to an unnamed object, listed among grave goods, sealed inside a box built for something 4 meters long, in a chamber cut apart from the rest of the corridor and left unlabeled by numeral. If you're hooked on this story, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. Your support means everything and helps me bring you more emotional stories like this one. None of this proves what was inside the box. It proves that whoever sealed it went out of their way to avoid saying, using the one part of their own record-keeping system built specifically to make sure nothing ever went unsaid. That absence, in a culture this obsessive about inventory, is its own kind of evidence. The timeline makes the silence heavier. The Netjeru Aa designation, wherever it surfaces, clusters around construction phases that predate the securely dated dynastic building programs at each site. At Abydos, the Osireion's largest blocks sit in a construction-style Egyptologist Margaret Murray noted in her 1904 survey as structurally distinct from the temple built directly above it, older in technique even though it sits at the same depth. At Giza, this channel has already covered how the oldest core masonry, not the latest, shows the tightest tolerances on the plateau, technology running backward instead of forward. At Saqqara, the pattern repeats a 3rd time. The 3 unlabeled boxes are older in tool mark analysis than the surrounding 2 dozen, cut with a technique the later boxes in the same corridor do not fully replicate, as if a method existed once, produced these 3, and was then only partially recovered for everything built afterward. 3 sites. 3 separate excavation histories a century apart, run by different people for different reasons. The same name, the same oversized proportions, the same pattern of the oldest work being the hardest to explain and the most quietly sealed away. If this were one anomaly at one site, it would be a curiosity. 3 independent sites converging on the same designation, the same scale, and the same instinct to seal rather than label, is harder to wave off as coincidence, and it is exactly the kind of pattern the standard chronology has never had to directly answer, because no one has assembled all 3 side by side in a single account before now. There is a reason the boxes were sealed and not simply left empty and open, the way an unused ceremonial container might be. Sealing takes intention. It takes a decision that something inside needed to stay contained rather than displayed, remembered rather than removed. The Egyptians were not shy about grand funerary display when the goal was to honor and immortalize. Tutankhamun's tomb, modest by pharaonic standards, still overflowed with gold, meant to be seen by the gods, and eventually, its builders hoped, by history. These 3 boxes were built at a scale larger than almost anything else at the site, and then hidden behind a wall built from different stone, in a side chamber cut apart from the main gallery, with the one column in the entire corridor left too large to write a number into. That is not how you treat something you want remembered. That is how you treat something you are not sure should ever be found. What was buried with the Netjeru Aa may simply have been what any burial holds: provisions, cloth, ordinary grave goods, described in unfamiliar vocabulary, because the scribe was working from oral tradition rather than direct knowledge, filling gaps the way any bureaucrat fills a form he does not fully understand. That is the fair, cautious reading, and it may be the correct one. It does not require anything more than 3 unusual boxes, a confused later scribe, and a modern audience eager to see more in a blank cell than a blank cell necessarily holds. But it does not explain why the chamber was cut apart from the rest. It does not explain the undated void beneath the floor that ground-penetrating radar has already flagged and nobody has followed up on. And it does not explain why, across 3 sites and 3 centuries of rediscovery, the pattern is always the same. The oldest work is the best work, the largest containers are the ones left unlabeled, and the name attached to all of it is a name the later dynasties seem to have gone quiet on rather than proud of. The side chamber at Saqqara remains sealed below floor level. The radar anomaly has not been excavated. The blank numeral is still blank, sitting in the Cairo storerooms where Mariette first catalogued it more than a century and a half ago, waiting on a translation nobody has been willing to commit to in writing. Whatever went into that box went in deliberately, went in at a scale the culture's own record-keeping struggled to contain, and has stayed exactly where it was left ever since. A second detail sat unremarked in Daressy's 1901 notes, for nearly 100 years before anyone connected it to the side chamber. Cut into the bedrock threshold, just outside the sealed masonry wall, at ankle height, is a row of shallow depressions, evenly spaced, worn smooth rather than carved sharp. Daressy described them only as grooves, function unclear, and moved on. A structural survey conducted at Saqqara in 2016, focused on stabilizing the corridor roof after a partial collapse nearby, photographed the threshold in passing. The grooves, measured against the depth of standard foot traffic wear found elsewhere in the same corridor, are consistent with centuries of repeated passage over the same narrow path, the kind of wear a doorway sees when it is opened and closed on a schedule rather than sealed once and forgotten. That detail complicates the simplest reading of the chamber. A tomb sealed one time, for one burial, does not usually develop foot-worn grooves at its threshold. Grooves like these belong to a space someone kept returning to. The Serapeum's main gallery was never a secret. Priests of the Apis cult maintained it, provisioned it, and recorded burials there across dynasties, in the open, the way any active religious site operates. The side chamber is different. It sits apart from the recorded liturgical schedule. No priestly roster, no ration list, no temple account book from the Serapeum's active centuries mentions who was responsible for it, who held the key, or what maintenance it required. And yet something wore a path to its door. The most straightforward explanation is mundane. Workers accessing an adjoining structural feature, perhaps a drainage channel or a construction shaft used during the corridor's original cutting, would leave exactly this kind of wear without any connection to the boxes at all. Saqqara is riddled with maintenance passages from multiple building phases, and a worn threshold near an unrelated feature is not, on its own, a sealed door revisited in secret. That reading deserves to stand until something rules it out, and nothing found so far does rule it out. What keeps the question open is a second, smaller inscription, found not on the panels beside the boxes, but on the underside of the lintel above the threshold itself, a place no visitor walking through normally looks. It was noticed only because the 2016 stabilization survey required scaffolding that put a camera at that height for the first time. The inscription is short, 4 glyphs, and uses a verb form Egyptologists classify as an imperative, an instruction rather than a record. Egyptian temple thresholds sometimes carry instructions like this, commonly warnings to the impure or reminders of ritual purity requirements before entry. This one does not match that pattern. The verb is paired with the same determinative for condition used elsewhere in administrative Egyptian to mark an ongoing state that must be maintained rather than a one-time act. Read plainly, it is closer to keep sealed than to any purification formula on record from the site. An instruction to keep something sealed, carved somewhere a casual visitor would never see it, at a threshold worn smooth by repeated foot traffic, tells a specific kind of story. Someone came back, not to open what was inside, to check that it was still closed. That is where the trail currently stops. The 2016 survey was never expanded into a dedicated excavation of the threshold or the chamber below it, because its funding and mandate were structural, not archaeological, and reallocating a stabilization budget toward research excavation requires a separate application that, as of this recording, has not been filed. The lintel inscription has been photographed and logged in the survey's internal report, but has not yet appeared in any peer-reviewed translation. The grooves remain uncatalogued as anything more than a passing note in a 120-year-old field journal. What we are left with is a room built to hold something too large for its culture's own measuring system to name, sealed behind a wall of different stone, sitting on an unexcavated void, with a threshold worn by feet that kept returning, and an instruction overhead that says, in the driest bureaucratic Egyptian anyone has yet found, to leave it exactly as it is. Whoever carved that line was not guarding a secret from us. They were leaving a note for whoever came after them, and the note has outlasted every dynasty that might have known what it meant. The grooves are still there. The lintel is still there. The instruction is still, as far as anyone has confirmed, being followed. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you loved this story, check out the other videos on your screen now. I think you'll really enjoy them. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. See you in the next story.